This is the Women Emerging Expedition podcast, so you can follow the ups and downs and the roundabouts of the expedition and play your part in them. 24 women started on the 28th of May 2022 on this virtual expedition that will take 9 months. We are women from across the world determined to find an approach to leadership that resonates with women. We'll be successful so that women the world over will be able to say, if that's leadership, I'm in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Julia Middleton, Expedition Leader. This episode is on what we can learn from women who lead movements. Extraordinary leaders who lead movements all over the world. I'm going to interview 2 people. Firstly, Latanya, who runs the Global Fund for Women, but also she spent the last 2 months writing a book which comes out soon called Everyday Feminist, and it's about absolutely this, women who lead movements. And so I asked her what she'd learned about leadership from them. And then the second person I want to interview is somebody who I personally have admired all my life. You know, sometimes people say to me, who are the women that you admire the most? Helena's one of them. The other woman I always talk about is Jude Kelly, who you've met already. She was on podcast 12. So my 2 heroines have been interviewed for this podcast. But Helena isn't just an everyday feminist. She's an every single day feminist. She's a lawyer, and she's always been at the heart of every movement I've seen over the last 30, 40 years that I have admired so much. She just makes things happen. And whenever I've done my small piece to start or to move or to create movements, she's also always backed me and helped me and encouraged me and sort of shown the way. So it is a delight to interview Helena. I asked Helena to talk through her latest passion, step by step, so that we could learn each piece of leadership from her. But first, let's talk to Latanya, who can give us a sort of a bigger picture. And let's start with what sparks a woman to start a movement. And then I've got to ask her loads of questions that I've always wanted to ask all movement leaders. And then towards the end, we'll get to, how do you finish, move on, end your involvement, close, evolve a movement. So maybe how you close it and how you restart it, I suppose. But anyhow, Latanya first on what leads a woman to start a movement.
It usually is going to be some event, something that you can really put your finger on. And the leaders of these movements are usually going to talk about that event as the reason that they got into that movement. There's a lot of people who are just tired of the status quo, the circumstance, but it usually is this thing that pivots people into a circumstance where they need to rise, where they need to organize, they need to mobilize, because to not do so would not be who they are. And I hope I.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
So if I am, a person who have experienced a certain injustice, and that injustice just does not sit well with me. And that's why I said it's usually some incident that means that it's either now or never. I've got to stand up. I've been watching this, I've been living this, but I can't do it anymore. And usually leaders will talk about that point. When they get to that point, they may not even realize when it happened. Some will, like we've had these circumstances, particularly in the US, of these incredible awful situations with police violence and or circumstances where women find themselves in particular, where they just cannot sit down any longer. They can't not say anything. And so this is where the leadership begins. when you first emerge, when the movements are emerging, the pace is always fast. The pace is urgent. I think is probably a better word than fast. Everything is urgent. There's usually some opportunity to change things, some opportunity to get in front of, whether if it's you're seeking legislation or you're seeking social change, social, thinking, you want to change people's minds. So there may be these media opportunities that have now opened up. I know when we talked to Tarana Burks over at Me Too, she talks about those moments, and we all know, when, and sometimes people thought about it as co-opting, the message of Me Too, but it was actually the moment, right? It was the urgent moment that allowed it to spark during that time. She had been working on this for way before any of these Hollywood greats had come and started to get involved. But it was that moment where it became urgent to take advantage of it, urgent to start using that message. And the leader that she is knew it and rode that wave, even when people didn't know her name, right? But that was the leadership, being able to capitalize on that moment and leverage it.
How do women protect themselves from believing their own bullshit?
You got to get people around you who call you. And you and I have both seen, both sides of that. You can surround yourself by a bunch of yes people, who are just so enamored with who you are and never tell you the truth about where things are headed or what they're hearing, through other movement members. Or you can surround yourself with people who will do a little bit of both, right? So you need people who are definitely sort of going to tell you what's right. But you also need to have those people around you who are going to absolutely tell you what's wrong. I think sometimes, particularly with larger organizations that some of the feminists are running, it gets hard because you're not making every hire, right? And so, but you got to at least have around you in your immediate circle, people who will call you on your bullshit, because otherwise all of us, are there's a possibility of getting heads that are so big that we don't know what else to do, but what we think we should do.
You also mentioned that the great movement leaders have a sort of intuitive instinct for who to bring into the tent.
Yes, they have these instincts around who are the right people to have, which organizations are doing the good things, meeting people and saying, how can we engage? How can we partner? I think we align. I think our partnership could be more than just a conversation, that we can do things together. And I've seen so much of this over the years, Julia, that I'm convinced that it must be just some sort of DNA gene or something, because you see people who have it and then you see people who absolutely don't. And it's okay. But normally these people, they rise to where they are either within the movement or within their organizations because they have this instinct around who to bring into the circle.
They're also not frightened of fighting, are they?
None of these are that we're talking about, honestly. And I can't even think of a social movement right now, especially a feminist movement, where if you're scared, you're not in it. One of the things that I've been really, and it's kind of like towards the end of the book, but like, why do feminist movements need you? It's because they will really put themselves in positions that are kind of dangerous in order to meet the mission, in order to achieve the drive, right, of the movement. And we need people, of course, to protect them, to make sure they're protected, not just their like words, and their intent of what they're trying to do, but literally save their lives. I mean,
did you say you thought they were fearless?
I don't believe that they're fearless. I don't know if you remember Reham Yaqub in Iraq when she was murdered. I was reading some of her statements and her letters before the assassination, and the same with Maricela in Brazil. I don't think they were fearless. I think that's not the word. They were afraid, and they kind of knew that they were being followed. They knew that they were, of course they were being like openly threatened, but that fear didn't immobilize them. They kept going. It didn't stop them. So, to be fearless is one thing, but to be with fear and to continue is what we're talking about when we talk about these feminist leaders.
I'm assuming you also discovered that the great leaders of movement are good with the media and with social media.
You know, what I think I've learned writing this book is that there's a variety of ways. I think you'll find that good leaders of social movements want to have that expertise. They want to be able to have people who can utilize those tools to be able to organize. I don't necessarily feel that they need to be the, face. And in fact, a lot of these everyday feminists that when you read the book, you'll see that they, may not be hugely popular at all, nor do they want to be. I found that lots of them are not interested in being in the limelight, but what they like about social media is that you can reach a whole lot of people, with one click. And so because they have this instinct, they want to be able to do this. And so they will tend to bring people into the fold and around them who's really good at that.
Would you describe leaders of movements as ruthless?
I don't know if I use that word, mostly because there's a connotation of sort of negative, a negative connotation that you would cut anybody's throat. I do though, and personally admire in a lot of movement leaders is that they will cut the throat of their opposition. Not, I'm talking figuratively anyway.
Yeah.
I do like that as a characteristic and personality trait of movement leaders who won't back down from opposition, who speak to power in ways that is clear, and will not, mince words with them. So I like that. But ruthless kind of indicates that they'd also do the same to their own. Many of the feminist leaders that I know, that they can do that. They can push back on their opposition and at the same time love and hold and be the caregiver of their movement at the same time, if that makes sense.
But I wouldn't like to get in their way.
No. I mean, think about some of the really badasses that and I think the ones that have been incredibly successful as leaders hold that trait dear. But at the same time, they're there for you every time you call them. They're absolutely going to show up. They your birthday, your wedding, your babies, they're always sort of as excited about that as they are about any of the movement work. So that's, for me, that's the distinction, the juxtaposition, right? Is that they're hard asses when they're talking to opposition, but they turn loving and soft when they're talking to their movement members.
What's the relationship between a movement leader and anger?
There's probably a certain level of anger that got you there. Let's be honest. A certain amount of just fuck youism, right? I'm gonna, no. that kind of energy, I see a lot. I am not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm not listening to you anymore. Or God forbid if you cross them, and say you're going to do something or say you're on their side, I see them get very angry with people who just try to use them, co-opt their messages. And I think for a lot of, especially Black women leaders and movements, I think they go through so much. And I don't mean just, by folks who are the perpetuators of whatever kind of issue that they're fighting against, but also those that say that they're their partners and don't deliver on it. And so, so I think anger is justified and necessary in some of this work.
So don't hide anger.
Why?
Lots of leaders
call you a bitch anyway.
Lots of leaders would say, if you express your anger, then you've lost it.
I don't know. I feel like it's an emotion that can drive a lot of change, a lot of energy. And sometimes I think if you're not angry, then you're probably in the wrong game for when we're talking about transformational social change. If it doesn't make you angry, it probably won't make you do anything.
What's the biggest mistake or blindness that you see in women who run movements?
I have to go back to this issue around caring for themselves. The biggest mistake I see is that people who just keep going, and probably not just for themselves, but they're probably driving a whole group of other people until they can't function anymore. I've seen it time and time again where, not only do you as a feminist leader feel like you have to sacrifice yourself, but you also feel that everybody around you has to sacrifice themselves in order to get shit done. And it's not necessary, but I know that for many, it's like, so they feel like so much is on their shoulders, that success means that they have to continue working like a dog. They have to continue being everywhere at once. They have to continue showing up in ways that actually might affect their own health, affect their own sanity. That's the thing that I see. And that's where decline starts, not just for the individual, but then it affects the movement. And then that brings me to probably related, but secondary, is the succession planning, thinking about this with a time horizon and saying, I can do this. I mean, all of us should, right? I could do this job for about 5 years. That's what I've got in me, a little more, a little less. But who am I going to bring along? Who is going to be beside me that then can step into this role and keep it moving, keep getting it done so that I can back out. I've seen some good stuff, but a lot of bad stuff in that, because I think it's hard for us to think about our exit.
If I'm honest, there was one movement that I was absolutely at the heart of beginning, and we failed totally. The forces that be made sure we did not succeed.
Yes.
And actually, it was choosing the moment to recognize that and say, it's not going to work this time.
Yeah. How do you make sure that we're not in the process of just sort of the fight after the fight after the fight, and never, one, recognizing success, or two, understanding that it's not always the same groups, it's not always the same people that have to be in the fight, being incredibly strategic. The best leaders also know when it's time to call it shop. And that could be the movement itself, like we were talking about, like the movement has or has not gotten the success that they wanted. Or it could mean the leader themselves, could be that this is the moment when I step out so that new leadership can come in to do a new thing. So if the law was passed, as I was talking about, then maybe the movement for changing minds is somebody else. That's another leader, and I think leaders intuitively and, with self-reflection, it also with considering the kind of care they need to take for themselves and their families, make some of those determinations. And we've seen that happen.
Yes, but not often. I mean, I don't know if it's you, but I think I see lots of people who just keep on and on and on and won't hand over.
And I think that's a shame, because usually what happens is, nobody can go on forever. There's burnout. I think we've seen in Latin America, and I talk a little bit about this in the book, where there's been like sort of the feminist movement itself, where people grew old in the movement and a lot of people felt shut out. Like younger people who wanted to lead, and it was time for them to lead, and they had new issues they wanted to address, felt like that they weren't able to sit at the table. What you see with some of the greater leaders is these shifts, so they may stay in the movement for the long game, but the leadership, the face, the agenda starts to shift to somebody else. And so I think having that kind of, astuteness is going to be important if a social movement is to really, really drive change.
Thank you so much, Latanya, for everything that you said. The one that absolutely I think has caught in my head, perhaps the strongest, is our slight disagreement over the word ruthless. I think you may not want to use the word ruthless, but I think ruthless is the word. I think you're right that women who lead movements are ruthless with the opposition. But what's so intriguing, as you say, is that they are also so deeply kind and loving to the people in the movement. And it's that combination that's fascinating. So let's go on to Helena, the woman I've always admired so much. Of course, when you have a heroine, you tend to sort of sit at their feet. So I did. And I promise you, I did end up pinning down the leadership learning. But first, I just wanted to tell you the story. That it's a beautiful story, I think, of one of the latest movements that she has started.
Now, let me just tell you about my judges. In 2008, the International Bar Association had been very active in creating a bar association. There'd never been one in Afghanistan. And I remember advocating very strongly that if they were reforming the law and trying to make the law at the heart of this country as it was developing anew, was to have women part of that lawmaking, because women needed protecting too. And that part of that social contract of societies is that you provide safety, but women have to be also made safe in their homes or in the public arena. We encouraged the law schools to open up and bring women in, and to have the judiciary include women, to introduce law that was about eliminating violence against women, and to create women's courts where women could have confidence about coming with their grievances. And these fabulous women were in those courts. In February of 2021, two Supreme Court women judges were assassinated. A Taliban, I mean, he might have been Al-Qaeda, who knows, but somebody opens the door of the car that they're in and shoots both of them, one through the head and one through the heart. And then barely 6 months later, the announcement is that we're going to be, the West is going to be leaving, the United States, Britain, other forces, going to be leaving by the end of August. We started receiving messages from the judges saying, help us, please. I'm hiding in my basement. They've let these people out of prison that we sent to jail. And it was heart-wrenching. And so I then started finding out about how we could get them out. I found out that American evangelical groups were getting Christians out. And so we contacted them to see if we could put some of our judges in the back of their planes. And they said, look, we haven't got room in the back of our planes, but this is the charter company we're using, and gave us the details and so on. And so we then discussed the possibility of chartering a plane. I mean, let me tell you, I was not imagining at that point I was going to be chartering planes. I had never thought I would be chartering planes. But we find out that chartering a plane costs $750,000 because there's no insurance and so on, and the Taliban could impound a plane. And the first thing was that we got a bit of money in order to get them into safe houses. We got some money to pay for a bit of security to give them the protection at that point. And then the question was, could we afford a charter plane? And so we started, I have to say that honestly, a large part of this was about the network of women that I know because of the work I've done over my life. And so sometimes you have to take a risk. You have to take a risk and believe that you can do it. And I can't pretend that there weren't times where I was sort of breathless thinking, oh my God, this could go horribly wrong. And how am I going to be able to, explain this to the world if, the Taliban prevent this plane going, and we've spent all this money getting a plane into Mazar al-Sharif, a northern airport, to take them out. It could have gone wrong at many different stages, and some things did go wrong. Iran said that they wouldn't let us fly over their airspace. We had difficulties at first getting people out who didn't have passports, or their children didn't have passports. Would an identity document be enough? Could we persuade the person who ran the airport at Mazar al-Sharif that to let them come with identity papers rather than a passport? Ended up getting 3 flights out. It was 103 women, judges, prosecutors. There were a couple of MPs on it. I got the 2 sons of one of the Supreme Court judges who was assassinated. We got out 500 people. And it was a sort of Schindler's List thing. But don't for a minute think that I started off thinking, I'm going to get out 5. I didn't. For a minute, I was going to get out 1 or 2 women judges. And then it grew like topsy. And my ambition for it grew as well. And but part of it is collaboration with others, working along with others, and therefore multiplying the possibilities of what you can do.
So then they all got to Greece. Then what happened?
Oh God. I mean, if we're talking about naivety, I mean, everyone thinks that I'm this very worldly person, you know, and of course, I mean, to a large extent, I think I am. Although things still shock me. That I assumed that once these women were out, and we then asked the world to open its arms and take them in with their husbands and children, that the world would do it. And it wasn't true. They weren't welcomed everywhere. It was really hard work to get countries to take those women judges in. I mean, I'm afraid that of my cohort, only 6 of the women judges and prosecutors were given places in the United Kingdom. I have to say that Canada was the real, you know, offerer of sanctuary, and they've taken in most of those women and their families. But it was a shock to me that there was such a lack of welcome.
Helena, while you've been talking, I've been writing down some of the things that I take from that story about leadership. Can I play some of them back to you?
Yes, do.
So one of them is the importance of naivety, the importance of being naive.
Yes, I mean, maybe naive is too pejorative a word in the way that we've come to use it. I think that having a sort of innocent belief that somehow you will make it work, that things will come good. I mean, it is about hope in a way. It's about keeping a high level of hope. I mean, there was a moment I get a phone call to say that the cheap hotels, the out-of-season hotels that we had arranged for this second lot of evacuations had all been cancelled. And all these people, the flights were the following morning. And these people were all already up at staying in hiding places close to the airport from which they would be leaving. I have to tell you that, I mean, tears began to roll down my face. That Airbnb had sort of said that they would help refugees in a different context. Anyway, and so I said to one of my lawyers, see if you can get a number for somebody at the very top of Airbnb. And I mean, it was a ridiculous thing because I had so many people, and how, you know, Airbnb was not going to be exactly opening its arms to this vast number of Afghan refugees. But I just thought I would ask them. And I got through to a very senior executive, and I told her the story. And I have to tell you, I awakened her in the middle of the night because I had completely forgotten the time difference. She ended up saying, we can't find Airbnb places at this short notice, but we will we'll find hotels and we'll pay for a fortnight of them staying in hotels. So Airbnb came up with that.
That's the second one I wrote down, is the ability of a leader to tell the story, even in the middle of the night on the phone to a stranger.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely crucial, isn't it? The ability to tell the story.
You really have to. I mean, I've always felt that advocacy is part of being a leader, and you have to be able to you have to, as you say, be able to tell the story. You have to be able to make a compelling case for the need of help, because people are being asked for help all the time. You have to sort of remind people what's involved in being a judge. It's not just about it's not, you know, people imagine judges are sitting in great comfort somewhere. They're dealing with this stuff. And then these women had threats. Sitting as judges, they were receiving threats all the time. Even when we thought it was all working, they were under threat and had to be protected because of the work they were doing. They were living with threat and with fear.
And then the next thing I wrote down while you were talking is that I remember a woman once talking to me about putting pennies in heaven, that you have to form friendships with masses of people over the years, and you put pennies in heaven. And then when the moment comes and you need the pennies back, there are lots of people. So, you know, that horrible expression for leaders, which is networking, it's much more than networking, isn't it? You have to build deep, trusting friendships so that when you shout help, people come.
It is important, that thing, that pennies in heaven thing, about and doing good things for other people. So that, you know, you've made yourself available. I've never done this thing when people phone me up and say, can you give me legal advice or can you help on something? Of course I do. I always do that. And I think that those things do help in the end when you need real help yourself for a project.
Then you have to show confidence even when you don't feel any confidence at all inside yourself. And you have to take the risk and believe that you can do it and show to everybody else that you believe, even if you're terrified inside.
Of course, I mean, people, you know, there is an issue which is around self-belief. And I think I probably did get that from my mother. I always remember an American friend of mine meeting my mother, a working class woman from Glasgow, and saying, your mother is amazing, you know, because she does stand tall, although she's 4'10", amongst any people. And because she knew who she was and felt okay about it. And my mother's thing to us as children was always, never think that you're better than other people, but nobody's better than you. And I do think that being able to look someone in the eye and not to be afraid or intimidated by them. And I do think that that I learned that from her. And so if you're asking people for help for others, it's the easiest thing in the world in a way.
The other one is your point, which I think is really interesting too, is that you never imagined, when you started off, you never imagined the scale of it.
You know, don't be put off because you think, you know, I mean, because don't imagine that when I, as a young lawyer, was scaling up and going up to the Court of Appeal to do cases, that I didn't go, and think, oh God, I'm going to be appearing in front of 3 great judges, and they're all going to be quizzing me about my argument and the legal basis from which I'm grounding my appeal. So, you know, you've really got to face the challenges that are frightening to you. That doesn't mean to take risks, but it doesn't mean reckless risks. I mean, I'm not reckless. I make calculations in all of this, but I do think that you have to do the thing that sometimes seems quite frightening.
I promise there's only 2 more. One of them is the one that I find that I'm hopeless at, which is, how do you cope with the disappointment when people and systems let you down?
Well, of course you get angry. And I did feel anger. I did feel let down that somehow my own government had sort of rules and drew up the bridge, which would have provided opportunities for people here. I used to shout when I was angry, and I still occasionally do, but I've learned to be much more sort of, if you like, directional about how I place my anger and my disappointment, and to express it in a way that I think is hard for people to hear, but I think that they have to hear it.
How much do you think, and actually how much do you recognize this truth in yourself, that one of the great pillars of leadership is energy and enthusiasm?
I think you have to have it. I think that people who seem to be sort of flat in their engagement often have difficulty connecting with the wider public. And I think passion is a useful thing, and it has to be harnessed, obviously, in a positive way. I also think that, and I feel it really strongly at the moment, that I feel that integrity is vitally important, and truthfulness. People know. I know this from juries. You know, I've spent my life in courtrooms, and you know, you bring a witness to the court, and you stand up to cross-examine them, and before I do, I watch them very carefully, and there's almost a sort of, you almost smell it in the courtroom when someone's telling the truth. and you know when people dissemble, and you know when people reach easily for a lie and for an easy answer. And I think in public life at the moment, we've got too much of that reaching easily for an excuse or a denial. And I think people know. And I think that integrity in public life and integrity is vitally important. And I think leaders, if we want to be leaders, we have to really be honest. And honest about our own failures and learn from the fact that we sometimes get things wrong. And we do. And also being honest about the times when we have felt fear and being worried that you've made the wrong call. So I think that we have to be much more honest. And I think people prefer that to the self-confident, denial of any frailty. And I think women are often much better at admitting that they've got things wrong, but that they've still got a vision. I think it's really important. But I think truth and integrity are vital in leadership.
Thank you. Thank you, both Latanya and Helena. That was utterly delicious. I suppose to ruthless and loving, and the combination of the two. After Helena, we've added that extraordinary belief that somehow you'll make it work, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Leaders just exude hope. It's been a glorious episode, and actually, I think next week's episode, which is the 30th episode, should continue this story about movements. Helena and Latanya have given us quite high level. What I want to do next week is go a little bit deeper down into two things that they've mentioned. The first one is this ability for leaders of movements to tell a story. Let's find out more about that. So I went and talked to Melissa, and she'll be on next week's episode. And then the second one that continues always to intrigue me is that movements are so much about timing. So I'm going to talk to Uma about a bit more detail on how to judge the moment, the judge the moment to go faster and the judge the moment to maybe even slow down, to judge when you're driving or when perhaps you're being driven by others. How do you judge the pace? So let's go deep on both of those, because women who run movements are fascinating leaders.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. We would love you to follow the expedition and provide your own stories and perspectives. You can do this by subscribing to this podcast and joining the Women Emerging group on LinkedIn, where you can have your say.